Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Canonical issues on gelatin, scenario number 2. And that was when in the ingredients section one reads the term porcine gelatin. Okay, and we assume that it is porcine gelatin before the duty bound is substantiated. It is porcine gelatin. And now, what does one have to do here? What is one's course of action? Now here we said 3 scenarios, or mini sub-scenarios if you like, may arise. Either istihala occurs according to the duty bound, it's substantiated before him or her that istihala does arise, or istihala does not arise before the duty bound, or the duty bound isn't sure whether or not istihala arises in the first place or not. These are 3 different scenarios here. Okay. Now, we want to now discuss that if it is substantiated. Now, we've discussed what istihala involves in the previous session. Now, here we want to start off with this scenario that it is substantiated before the duty bound that istihala does arise. Okay. Now, if it does arise, theoretically, it would mean now we have a new material here, with a different specific form, if you recall the previous lecture, and therefore it doesn't have to, it's not najis like the previous form, specific form, that of the pig's bone collagen, for example, okay, was najis because every component of the pig, even the hair and saliva, they're najis, and pigs are one of the concrete najasat. Here, if this bone collagen, when it converts into this gelatin, if one does believe that a modification of the specific forms has been realized, here the gelatin no longer becomes najis. It's a new material, therefore it's regarded as canonically pure, theoretically. Okay? Now, that's why istihala is important, whether or not it does happen. Now the issue is this: assuming istihala is substantiated before the duty bound, okay, so that's a given. Here, 3 new scenarios arise. This istihala, the process, did it arise in qalil water, or did it arise in khur water, or you're not sure. The duty bound isn't sure whether it arose in qalil water or that excessive water, the khur water. One doesn't know. 3 different scenarios one has to cover. Let's cover the first one. The problem is this, that if the istihala, when let's say that the bone collagen or the intestinal collagen, the intestines of the pig, which has collagen in it. Now, the bone, the intestines of the pig, these are all najis, okay? When you put this into water for the chemical hydrolysis to occur, on putting something which is najis into qalil water, from the very moment it enters the qalil water all becomes najis. Okay? And then even if istihala does occur, this new material, this gelatin, arises in najis qalil water. And therefore here gelatin would be deemed najis, canonically impure, and one is not allowed to consume it in such a case. So that's if istihala was, if you know, you're certain that istihala was to occur in qalil water. Now let's go to the next scenario, that the istihala arises in voluminous quantities of water, excessive amounts of water, khur water. Now, as I said, I'm not sure exactly what the amounts are. You can check that in your marja's treatises, risalas. Okay. So, you put the bone or intestines of the pig into excessive amounts of water. and then istihala occurs. Now, when you put something najis into core water, the core water does not become najis in its entirety like the qalil water did. So that's why we're using this scenario now, that you've put the intestines or the bone of a pig into core water. Now here, if istihala was to occur, since the surrounding water is no longer canonically najis, once the istihala occurs, this gelatin would therefore not be najis, because it's surrounded by core water, which does not become najis by merely putting a concrete najis in it. See, this is the difference between, one of the differences between qalil and core water appears here. However, now if you put the intestines or the bone or whatever part which contains collagen of the pig in the core water, there are one or two other points one has to take in mind. That does the water, the core water in its entirety, does it become muzaf before istihala arises? You've added the intestines, you've added the bone or whatever, and it's led to this core voluminous amounts of water becoming muzaf. Muzaf is a liquid which is not mutlaq. Mutlaq water, or in relation to water, there are two different classes that it's been classified into: muzaf water and mutlaq water. In mutlaq water, the definition is whatever water that is deemed by the common layperson as pure water. Okay? But in muzaf water, here it's not pure water anymore. Whatever is not deemed as pure water by the common layperson, it's called muzaf water. So for example, the liquid which is extracted from an orange, for example, it's not deemed as pure water. It's liquid, but it's not, they don't call it water. The common layperson won't call it water. Therefore, they call it muzaf water. Or, the liquid extracted from watermelons, for example, or from flowers. These things aren't regarded as pure water. Although the water, for example, in the sea, that is regarded as pure water by the common layperson. They'll call it water. Okay, water, just because it's been added, a few things have been added to it, it doesn't make it impure. It doesn't make it a water that is muzaf. It's still classified, it's still deemed as water by the common layperson. For example, in a swimming pool, there's some water in it. Just because you've added chlorine to it, or just because a few leaves have, fallen into the swimming pool and it's changed, a bit, the colour of the water, very slightly, let's say, one still calls that, water. But let's say water has been, many dyes have been added to the water, and to such an extent that the whole colour has changed, and now no one calls it water anymore. That would be deemed as muzaf water. Whatever water which is not deemed as, the normal pure water by the common layperson, it's called muzaf. The common examples they give, it says the water that is extracted from different fruits, for example, and so on and so forth. Here, does the core water become muzaf before istihala occurs? Now, the reason why this is important is because if a concrete najis, if something najis enters muzaf water, even if it's 1,000 liters, okay, even if it's core amounts, if the water though is muzaf, if a single concrete najis thing enters into the water, it will make the whole water najis. That's one of the differences between muzaf and mutlaq water. With normal water, pure water, mutlaq water, when you add something najis to it, it doesn't make the whole thing najis if it's khur. If it was qalil, it would make it all najis, albeit mutlaq. But when it's khur, just by adding something najis to something khur, it doesn't make the whole water najis. It will only make those parts of the water whose taste, odor, or color has changed totally. It'll only make those different parts of the khur water najis, not the whole thing. But with qalil mutlaq water, water, we said that by simply putting something najis into it, it will become all najis. Now here, the concept of muzaf I want to mention, that if you have water in voluminous amounts, in excessive amounts, and then you add something, and it's all muzaf, okay? The water is muzaf. It's not mutlaq. It's not the normal pure water. It's all muzaf. It's all, let's say, grape juice or orange juice or watermelon juice or whatever you want to say. But it's not pure normal water. Now it's in voluminous amounts. It's in khur amounts. You put something najis into it, it all becomes najis. Why? Because it's muzaf. And we have this in the traditions. If the water was normal and pure, mutlaq water, and in khur amounts, it wouldn't have become najis. But since it's muzaf, it would become najis. So let's say you've added the bone or intestine components to the water, and by adding them, the water all becomes muzaf. Here this is problematic, because now you have something in contact, something najis in contact with muzaf water, and therefore the whole water will become, albeit in excessive amounts, the whole water will become najis. So the classification here, that istihala arises in voluminous excessive amounts of water, in khur water, but the point is, does that khur water become muzaf before istihala, not after, before istihala or not? If the khur water becomes muzaf before istihala actually becomes realized, that will become, that new product, the gelatin, would become najis, because it was in a muzaf environment, in a muzaf milieu, in a muzaf medium. Now istihala arises. Okay, but this happened before istihala arises. Therefore, it was intestine, it was bone collagen from the pig. It was najis, and since it's now in contact with muzaf khur water, the whole thing becomes najis. And then istihala arises. Then the gelatin would be in contact with najis water, and then therefore the gelatin would become all be the istihala occurring. Okay, assuming we accept that, the gelatin would become najis and it would not be allowed to be consumed. But if the khur water doesn't become muzaf before istihala, okay, istihala arises and it's in still khur water, mutlaq water. It doesn't become muzaf. Okay, before the istihala actually arises. In such a case, then the gelatin would be tahir, it would be canonically pure, and it would be allowed to be consumed. And finally, if, let's say, we have doubt whether or not it becomes muzaf, this khur water, whether or not it does become muzaf before istihala arises, we don't know. Okay, here the principle of presumption of continuity, istishab, has to be exercised here. And that's when you know once upon a time it was substantiated before you that the water was not muzaf. You have to therefore presume continuity, and in this case continuity means you have to presume it is still not muzaf. In cases of doubt, istishab is exercised, and here istishab involves you to presume that continuity of the absence of muzaf, and therefore in such a case the gelatin would be deemed tahir and permissible to consume. So far we've covered istihala arising in qalil water and istihala arising in khur water. Now let's say that one doesn't know In this given company which produce, I mean, gelatin is produced in industry. It's produced in industrial, amounts. It's not as if gelatin is produced by just putting a component of the pig, let's say, inside a glass of water. It's much more immense than that. Gelatin is produced in, industrial amounts. Now, let's say if we don't know at all whether istihala arises in qalil or khur water. We don't know this. If we knew it was in qalil water, it's najis and can't be consumed. If we knew it was in khur water, and assuming muzaf hasn't been substantiated before istihala arises, we said that's okay too, no problem. With qalil water, it wasn't okay. With khur water, it would be okay. What if we don't know whether the istihala, which has been substantiated before us, arises in khur or qalil water? We don't know. What's the ruling there? Okay, now here, asalatul hilliya, which we covered in the first 2 lectures, just in case you haven't heard of it. If you go back, listen to those lectures, it would be wise to go through these lectures one by one in the right order. Anyway, we don't know whether the istihala has arisen in qalil water or khur water. Here, what's the ruling here? Now, sometimes one may know that one is sure, one is certain, by whatever means, that in at least, some companies, in some places, khur amounts of water, excessive amounts of water is used. Okay? One doesn't know in which specific company, but one knows that it's used in the area where one resides, or the area where that food has been made or whatever. One knows that in some places that khur water is used. If one knows that, then the gelatin which is produced from istihala would be deemed canonically pure and permissible to consume. And that's because of asalatul hilliya. Because in asalatul hilliya, that the principle of presuming it to be halal, it's when in the equation there are many alternatives, and one of those alternatives is a halal alternative, whilst another isn't. If there is a halal alternative, that would make it permissible for you to execute and exercise asalatul hilliya, based on that, this principle which is extracted from the texts. Because if between the alternatives, one alternative is halal and the others are haram, it would allow you to presume that this food that you're in doubt in relation to whether it was made in khur water or not, it would allow you to consume it. Here the halal alternative would be that the gelatin, the istihala, arose in a khur environment and muzaf did not occur. That's a halal. In that case, the gelatin would be halal. The haram environment is if the istihala arose in qalil water. That would make it najis. You don't know which is which. Asalatul hilliya dictates that you can presume it to be halal and therefore consume it. Now that's if you know that there are places where it's khur is used in the industrial, let's say, production of gelatin. Let's say you don't know at all, that in all these different companies which make gelatin, you don't know at all whether they use khur water or qalil water. In the previous case, you knew that there are places which make it, in industrial amounts, in khur amounts. But let's say you don't even know that. You don't know that, any place, you don't know with certainty of any place which makes it in khur amounts. They may do, but you don't have that knowledge. Here, If you want asalatul hilliya to be exercised and allow you to regard it as halal to consume, you have to deem it probable that there's a halal possibility somewhere. If you deem it probable that in one of these companies which produces gelatin, if you deem it probable that it's made in a halal manner, i.e. the istihala arising in core water, if you deem it probable, that will suffice for you to enforce the principle of asalatul hilliya and therefore regard it as tahir and permissible to consume. Okay, so that was if istihala, these different scenarios we went through were if istihala was substantiated before us. Now in the next lecture, inshallah, let's say we know that istihala is substantiated before us, that istihala does not arise. Or we don't know if istihala does arise or not. These two can be grouped together in under one class. The same rulings apply to each of them. So we'll put them together. So let's in the next lecture, inshallah, we'll cover that this scenario that we read that this porcine gelatin, istihala is substantiated before. We read that the label writes porcine gelatin, and we accept it as porcine gelatin, but it's substantiated before us that istihala does not occur. We don't believe in istihala, or we're doubtful in relation to whether or not istihala does arise. In these two scenarios, we group them together because the rulings that follow will be the same. Inshallah, we'll touch upon this in the next session. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi.